And so I got to New York about a week later. We did a showcase, and one of the girls who was in my grad school class had a friend from college who was working as a casting associate for Meg Simon, who was casting at Fox at the time. And this casting associate came to our showcase, and out of it asked me to come in and read for some show on Fox. I don't know if it ever went, but it was a pilot about like 3 women lawyers. And I would venture to say it was not a particularly feminist look at women lawyers, but
right.
I went in, I read for it. The casting associate was there. Meg Simon actually was there too, which was nice of her to show up to an audition for somebody that, nobody ever heard of.
Usually it's a pre-read, yes. But, and then if they deem you worthy, they pass you on to the next. That's nice. That's great to have her in the room, the decision maker in the room while you're doing your art.
Exactly. I mean, I don't even think I had an agent at this point. And the audition ended, and she sort of put her head in her hands, and she looked back up at me and she said, "Okay, I think there's a possibility you're a good actor, but I have no idea, because you're coming out of theater school and you're giving me an audition to a 2,000 seat Broadway house, and I'm reading you for television." Now, I had no experience in film or television. I came from one of those grad programs that was like, we only do theater and art, yes, and we don't teach you about how to make a living. Right. So she, and Meg has a reputation for being a really tough woman. But she was incredibly generous with me that day and very kind and fair. She said, "I'm not going to see you again for the rest of the summer. I'm going to give you homework. I want you to work on these 5 things. And when I bring you back, we'll see if you're an actor or not."
What were the 5 things? Do you remember even a couple of them?
Okay. I wish I'd written them down. The one that I remember, one was, "Honey, you have to learn how to do makeup." Because I didn't wear makeup at the time. And so, like, she showed me my face on camera. She's like, you don't have eyes or a mouth. Like, you're a pink blob of a face. So go to the counter at Macy's, have somebody do your makeup, buy it, and learn how to use it.
Which is helpful. I mean, as direct as it is, if you don't know what you look like on camera, that is helpful.
1,000%.
Right.
But the other thing was, she was like, "You're delivering this to the back of a Broadway house. The camera is right in your face. So you need to learn to scale your performance to a camera." And so what I started doing back then, in New York, the way you got your audition sides was your agent would leave them in a file box outside their office door, and you would have to go get them. So I lived in Brooklyn at the time. It was about 45 minutes door to door. And I would run my audition sides out loud on the subway. And I would figure out when my performance was contained enough, when people stopped looking at me like I was a fucking lunatic.
Smart. Smart.
So, like, if you're doing it so big that, that the crazy person at the other end of the train is like, "What in the name of God is that crazy lady talking about?" You're too big. So once I got to the point where I just looked like a normal New Yorker talking to myself, I was like, okay, I think this is the scale of the performance. And then, so I worked on it. I also, I got an awesome commercial agent named Doug over at Paradigm, who sent me on probably 200 commercial auditions that summer. So I got a ton of on-camera, like real quick on-camera audition practice, figured out the makeup game. And then in the fall, Meg brought me back to read for Tarzan.
No way. The next thing was Tarzan. I just got chills.
The next thing was Tarzan. She was not in the room for that. That was, it was her casting associate, John Power, who was there.
Were you kind of relieved that she wasn't in there? Did it give you more, did it calm you more to not have her there? Or were you ready to have her witness your transformation?
I was so in the middle of, I was doing a small arc on a show for CBS called Queen Supreme at the time.
Yes.
So I knew that I was working on camera a little bit. And I'll be honest, probably more honest than I should be. I didn't like Tarzan. I didn't like the script. And so I went in because I thought it would be good practice to get back in front of them, but I wasn't trying to book the job.
Huh. Isn't that always the case? When you don't really care, you don't really want it, that's always what you get. And when you really want something, it's like you're gripping it, you're holding it, you have all these great ideas, and nope, zero.
It's a weird alchemy, but it seems to be almost universally true that there is something about the letting it go. I had a teacher in grad school who used to call it fuck it seeds. She's like, just spread fuck it seeds around your audition space.
Yes.
And just say, fuck it. It'll be okay.
Say, fuck it. Those are always when I do self-tapes, when I'm like, let me just do one fuck it take and see. That's always the take. That's always the version that I send off. I'm like, there's looseness. There's a space in which your artistry can come through without any judgment of your own ego on it, because you're not attached to an outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then Tarzan, did you just go in the room, do it with the associate, and did they just book you off that, or did Meg get to call you back in?
Oh no, it was the full Studio Network process. So auditioned for John, came back for Meg a second time. And then they flew me out to LA. I'd never been to LA before, for the studio and network tests. And I mean, I just had in the middle of that process, this is a way longer story for another time, but in the middle of the process, I turned it down 3 times. I was like, you know what? I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this.
Really? Now, did they throw more money at you, or did they just keep coming back to you?
No, it wasn't about money. This was way before there was any contract. It was just, I didn't, my attitude at the time was that television wasn't where I wanted to be, that I really wanted to be doing theater. I had all of that stuff in my head about, there was like a hierarchy, right?
Yeah, with your artistry. Yes, absolutely. And I get it. I think it should be that way. Theater should be held in the prestigious level that it makes the most money. It's the most art. You get one chance to really show this character, whereas television and film, especially during that time, mostly television during that time, it wasn't the same caliber of talent to carry a show or to, actually, Tarzan WB?
Yep. Back when there was a WB. It was right after they had just launched Smallville.
Right.
They were doing their thing. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, television at that point was not a place where you had really great directors and really great writers across the board. Now, David Nutter directed the pilot of Tarzan, and David Nutter is, I think, a sensational director. For people who don't know, he did a ton of Game of Thrones. He did a bunch of The West Wing. There were real artists in television even then, but there was also a bit of hackery that you kind of had to ride with.
So then what was the ultimate decision to accept Tarzan? Because I feel like how interesting that the world keeps knocking on your door with that, and that ends up being the calling card to the next job, It's like this domino effect of the one job that you weren't necessarily keen on taking, then kind of sets the path for the rest of them to continue to follow suit.
Okay, so 2 things changed my mind on Tarzan. One was a phone call from Peter Roth, who's the head of Warner Brothers Television. And he said, I don't understand what's happening. He's like, you've done nothing. Nobody knows who you are. You've turned down me, Laura Ziskin, and David Nutter. And of course, I didn't know, my agent was like, Peter Roth is going to call you. I was like, great, who's Peter Roth? I was...
Which is great. It's actually...
I knew nothing about Hollywood. I'd never been... It's freeing, for sure. Laura Ziskin was just coming off of Spider-Man, and she produced Pretty Woman. She was probably one of the most powerful female producers in Hollywood at the time. And he goes, what's wrong with you? And I said, well, look, I talked to him about my creative concerns about the material, and he told me a very personal story about his kid and an innocence that he felt the show was trying to express. And I thought, you know what, that's a really interesting perspective. I think that's something we can work with. I think we can play around with this idea of what does it mean to be an innocent in New York, this Tarzan character. And he kind of sold me on that. And I went around and I was chewing it up in my head, kind of going, I don't know about this. And of course, like every actor in New York with a SAG card, I was doing an episode of Law and Order at the time.
Yeah.
And although it was SVU and it was their third season, which is insane how long ago that was. And the actor playing my husband, I brought this decision to him and I was like, what do you think? Like, my vision was to be a regional theater actor, see if I can get a couple Broadway shows in my career. This is not what I wanted. What's your opinion? Because he'd been in the business about 15 years longer than I had. And he said, well, that's the career I have. He's like, I've done a bit of Broadway understudying. I work, I do leads all over regional theater. He's like, and let me tell you something. The third time they turn your lights out, it starts to feel less romantic.
Yeah.
And I went, wow. He's like, look, theater's not going to go anywhere. But until you can stop bartending 40 hours a week, you don't even have a chance at building an acting career. And I thought, well, that's the economics that my grandmother would have run me through.
Uh-huh.
And more than anybody else, and God love me, I don't even remember his name, but more than anybody else, he was the one who
started this path for you. It really, how incredible that you got the wisdom that you needed from somebody else. When you look for it, you seek it. And I also think that when you seek wisdom from somebody else, it's already something that you already innately know inside yourself. You just need the validation to make that courageous decision, just because it's not in alignment for what you think or how you think you're going to get somewhere. It's for us, it's not to know the how. It's just knowing that for you, Falling Among the Stars was being on Broadway, which is still very much a possibility, if not even more so now, if you can give yourself a name in acting. And his guidance, I mean, for me, looking at the career, especially what you just said at the beginning of this is your domino effect. Who knew that Tarzan would be the one tile that needed to go down to continue to keep you working on some of the most outrageous shows that changed television?
The generosity that he showed in just kind of breaking it all down for me was amazing. And I love that insight that you're sharing, that, when we seek wisdom, maybe what we're looking for is a sort of confirmation of some kind of inner guidance.
Yeah.
It is the domino effect. And that was actually something that David Nutter talked to me about. He said, look, he's like, if you take this job, you won't be riding on the bus anymore. You'll be driving it. And actually, as a wrap gift, I got him this beautiful Tiffany silver key, and I engraved it, and I just said, thank you so much for the keys to the bus. And he was really right. Like, they brought me in for Prison Break because of Tarzan. Frank Darabont was a big fan of Prison Break, and so he brought me in for Walking Dead. When I read for Colony, they liked the audition. I'd worked with Juan Campanella once, and he called my crew on Walking Dead. He called Mike Satrazemis, the camera operator, and Amy Lacey, the script supervisor. And he said, I need to know I'm not going to work with a monster. What's Sarah like? And they happen to be two very dear friends. And so they were like, oh, you'll be great. But yeah, every one of those jobs led to the next one.
Oh my gosh. So then I have to ask, has there been a moment where you've questioned, or that lack for a better word, insecurity has kind of creeped back up to be like, oh, you should be doing something else? Or are you able to completely let go now, since your experience at the beginning really was driving you towards this domino effect? Are you the type of artist that can be like, whatever will come to me will come when it needs to? Or do you have those panicky moments when you end a show like Prison Break, or you end a show like The Walking Dead, of having like, okay, what am I going to work again?
Oh, constantly. Right now during this shutdown, I'm developing 8 different projects on the film and television and podcast space with a bunch of different production companies, because I'm convinced that if Council of Dads doesn't get renewed, I'll never work again unless I create my own work. Like, there's I don't know. Maybe there are people who are like, yeah, it's good. That's cool. But I don't know any. Every actor I know, every time a job ends, is like, eh.
Well, and I have to ask too, being on such prominent shows that of course, the industry is seen as well as the rest of the world. Have you ever run into the problem of being typecast? Or like you already told us that doing these shows open to the next job, to the next job. But I'm wondering if after The Walking Dead and everybody knows you as Lori, has a perceived idea of who you are versus you being an artist and an actor, has it made it impossible for some doors to open?
Yeah, I mean, comedy. It's definitely a struggle.
Would you like to do more comedy?
I mean, I've sort of suffered professionally in like 225 episodes of television or something, and there's been a lot of crying. It's one of the things I loved about Council of Dads is there is a lightness and a gentleness and a kindness and a humor in that show. I was not interested in going back and like toting a gun anymore. But you know, I mean, there's a show called Letterkenny that's this Canadian. It's a sort of Canadian hit here and kind of a cult thing in the States. It's on Hulu, I think, in the States now. And I loved it. And I just thought it was great. And so I wrote him a letter and I was like, look, I know that you probably don't think I'm funny and there's no reason that you ever would, but if you're ever in the market for a 5'8" brunette, I love your show and I'd love to come do it. And like a year later, they reached out and they're like, we wrote a part for you. She's a Mennonite. Her name's Anita Dick. You know, we have no money and we film in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, great, I'm in. And so I took the no money and went to the middle of nowhere and had the most fun. I was like, wait, I totally did the wrong thing. I should have been in comedy. It was amazing. I loved it.
Well, and I thank you for sharing that because I think that people make assumptions that when you get to a certain level in your career, that things just come to you. That, you know, they probably have this illusion of you sitting on a deck in one of your houses, just reading through script. I loved hearing that your passion or your inspiration from somebody else's work compels you and motivates you to say, I want to play. I want to be in that arena and seeing how that delivers. Like there's no, that's the best way, right? We asked to be a part of this industry because we want to be a storyteller, not because we just want to play one character for the rest of our lives. We want to express in different ways. And I think that the general audience, as well as our industry, is at fault for once people do one thing really well. We think of them naturally. You're like, oh yeah, Sarah would be great for this. But we don't think of like, let's also see what she could do with this material. That's so nice to hear that you reached out, that they received it, and then allowed you to come play in a different playground so you can show a different skill set.
It was amazing. And it was very, it was generous of them. I mean, one of the director, Jacob Tierney, has become a really good friend of mine since. And I asked him, I was like, why? What made you think I could do this? And he's like, actually, we wrote the episode so that we could cut you out if you were terrible. And I was like, that's really smart. It's really smart. Really smart. And then they wrote another one for me. So I got to do another one. And I think there's one more that we're going to try and do together. But it's, you know, I mean, I think something happens in a career with even just a teeny little bit of success. You end up getting tested, which is once you've done something, people will come to you to ask you to do it again. And there'll be another TV version, or there'll be a feature version, or there's a little bit of courage, I think, that's required to turn down the low-hanging fruit, because the low-hanging fruit can be a bit of a trap, right? Like after Walking Dead, I did a couple of genre movies for various reasons. There was a director I wanted to work with. There's some subject matter I was interested in. And then there were offers for like another 20 horror movies. And I was like, nah, now we got to say no to all of this, because that becomes a dead end. And if you don't pivot, even a little bit, if you don't pivot, then you're stuck. You're stuck.
What do you do in those moments of pivot to help keep the ego at bay of the I'm not going to work again? Is there a practice that you do? Because there's a lot of people that listen to this show that are series regulars and they're constantly trying to make decisions based on I sometimes wonder if the decisions are being based out of fear, exactly what you said, low hanging fruit. And we constantly have that nagging voice of you're never going to work again. So how do you, as Sarah, is there any practice, technique, meditation, or something that you do to distill down to that inner voice of what your artistry wants to do next?
A lot of it for me has to do with being in the woods, or being on the water, being out in nature. I don't live in Hollywood. I live on a farm in British Columbia, and a there's a clarity that comes out here. I also, and I know this isn't a very romantic answer, but a lot of it comes down to economics for me.
Yes. No, I thank you for being honest. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't spend a lot of money, which means I tend to not have to take the job that's like, well, this is going to be a hell of a compromise, but it'll pay the bills. I find that as soon as I had more money than I needed to spend in a month, I bought my house and worked really hard. I actually just paid it off last year.
Hey, amen. That's amazing.
I thank you. It was actually one of the things I've been most proud of, because I had a moment of going, okay, no matter what happens to me in my career from here forward, we have a home and my kids have a place to live. And I can bag groceries and make enough money for us to eat food, and we'll make it. And I know that sounds like a really weird.
No, I think it sounds beautiful. Can I ask, when did you decide it was best for you and your family not to be in a city that potentially gives you jobs, and trust that the jobs will still come to you, and moving out? Did you move to Atlanta when you guys were shooting Walking Dead?
It's sort of, yeah. I mean, for the first year, because the first season was only 6 episodes on Walking Dead.
Mm-hmm.
So we were only there for a summer. And I loved Atlanta. LA really never worked for me. I found it very hard to keep an eye on who I was. Mm. And to kind of try and dig out any kind of integrity when I was living there. And so the deal I made with my husband, we'd bought this place up here in BC, and we were sort of living there part-time. And the deal we made was, if I can book 3 auditions off a tape, then we can
stay. Oh, yeah. Then you can move. Okay, great. That was going to be my next question is, do you now, everything that comes through prior to maybe like you just said, so are you doing everything from tape, and then if there's interest, then you fly into New York or LA or wherever you need to go, but you get to stay there and kind of work on your own little, do you have somebody that puts you on tape up there? Do you and your husband do it?
I'm curious. Probably one of the biggest threats to my marriage would be if my husband put me on tape. I would become a monster. Yeah. So I usually go down to LA about once every 6 weeks, because I'm developing, I'm sort of working on the directing end of my career and various things I'm writing that are in development. And so when I'm down there, I have an opportunity to kind of check things out. I'm not super focused on the acting side of my career right now as much as I am the writing, producing, and directing side.
That's wonderful. That's what's going to be my next question then. So then that's kind of great that you can decide. Well, also you have such a foundational work of your acting that now planting roots for the producing and writing and directing. I would love to know how you were able to start directing on Colony, or was there something before Colony that kind of you got your feet wet in the directing, or were you able just to negotiate that into your contract?
A little bit of neither.
Okay. Great. How did you do this, Sarah? Please let us know.
Well, by which I mean, okay, so we talked earlier about parity issues. Mm-hmm. And maybe this is a useful story to kind of balance that, which is to say that, like, Colony was a white guy fest, right? It was all written, directed, produced by white dudes. One of whom was Josh Holloway, my co-star and friend of mine for years. And at a certain point, I was looking around Hollywood going, I don't see the stories I want to be telling. And I realized that at that point, I'd been in 200 episodes of television and I'd had 6 female directors. And I was
Wow.
like, enough already. So I sat down with Josh and I said, I think I want to direct next season. What do you think? Because you're my friend, you're my co-star, you're an EP. If you say no, I won't push it any farther. And he was like, oh, not only do I want you to do this, but I will be your champion. And he was. And it was one of those moments where the straight white men in power lifted up one of the women. And, you know, he got in there and kind of fought for me. And Carlton ended up saying, Carlton Cuse was our executive producer. And he said, listen, if you need to shadow on your hiatus, shadow 2 contrasting shows and really dig in and get experience. And so I got on the phone and called the almost exclusively white straight male directors who had directed me.